Welcome, everyone, on this 13th day of April 2017. My name is Luke Thomas, and this is a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. As you can see, 3 deep today. One, Ariel Helwani, is not here. I don't know where he is.
I think he's in Montreal.
Montreal.
Is he really?
He's just on the local news out there with his
He was up there watching the Canadians lose.
You know, that's really his problem. He's not on TV enough. That's really his issue.
He duped him into thinking he didn't know what he was doing, but
and he stole more camera time. That Ariel. So he's gone this week. He'll be back next week. But the 3 of us are here today, and we're going to guide you through the topics. To my left is Jeff Wagenheim of The Washington Post. At the end is Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com, and I'm Luke Thomas of SiriusXM, as well as MMAfighting.com. All right, gentlemen. United Airlines. No, I'm teasing. I am tired of. Wow. I am tired of United takes. I've had enough. I've had enough. But there are a lot of UFC things to get to. All right. Everyone and their brother has given their takes on UFC 210, but there are some elements that need to be discussed and some things that actually haven't been discussed. So let's plow through this. Let's start with the co-main event first. Chris Weidman, in a very, very dire situation, takes on Gegard Mousasi and loses. And there was this referee commission, what we thought was a meltdown. After the fact, I'm not so sure it was a meltdown. It was certainly unclear. Jeff, with hindsight now being 2020, some time to reflect on it, was it a big disaster what happened to Chris Weidman and Gegard Mousasi, or was it a minor disaster that we blew out of proportion?
I wouldn't say it was a big disaster for Chris Weidman, although losing your 3rd straight fight, I guess,
which we'll get to in a minute.
In some ways, is a disaster. But in terms of the justice, I wouldn't say it was against it. But it's a big disaster that we're sitting here now on a Thursday, and it's only really like a day or so ago that we really got some clarity as to what was going on Saturday. So if all of what we know now we knew immediately as that was happening, then was fine. It seems like now we can say that they did the right thing. That the original call of an illegal knee was overruled after a replay was looked at, and at the same time, a doctor used judgment and said, well, this guy is concussed and cannot continue. So I don't see any problem with any of that. Unfortunately, it was just in the moment, it was just a cluster, you know what.
Once the dust settles into this thing, I look back on it and I think it's just a perfect storm of one of those crazy things, because you had the new rule too. There's a new rule in this whole situation. You're thinking, okay, he knows the rule, obviously. Chris Weidman is putting both hands down. He knows the rule. He doesn't know what's going on as he's slammed into his head. Now, once this whole thing is happening and they're trying to clarify through him, hey, are you okay? You get to 5 minutes and all this stuff, and then they go get the news. They do the review. They come back. He's still believing at this point that it's a foul, and it's just one of those things. You're like, now you have 2 different narratives in play, and they're giving him his time anyway. Still, even after they understand, the situation, which was, just so confusing. But once you really look at it, now that the dust has settled, Chris, I guess the lesson is if you're not truly hurt, you shouldn't play that card. And I don't know the extent of how he was hurt, because some of the argument on the Weidman side was, hey, he might have been able to still keep going. And that is the one thing that you can look at and feel really bad for Chris Weidman in that scenario, is that he could have survived it possibly and still turned the fight. He was winning the fight up until that sequence, essentially. That's the one thing he has. I don't feel bad for guys like Gegard Mousasi, who I think they got, ultimately, when you really look at it, you're like, well, he still got what he deserved. Like, he got the victory.
Did he?
That's my take on it.
But he didn't get to affirmatively stamp a victory.
It's true. And it's unfortunate for him in the sense that this fight left us no resolution. One of these guys could have made a huge statement to make a play at the title, obviously, and Chris Weidman needed it in the worst kind of way. But Mousasi, he needed an emphatic anything just to get to that spot. I feel like he's just on that cusp at all times. And this, I don't know how this moves him. The only thing right now you really think is, if you don't play it back, I feel like there'll be a sense of, there won't be a sense of resolution to this fight ultimately. But in the end, I still think that ultimately it shook out the only way it possibly could have. In terms of a mess, at least it was closest to right.
In the end, was only in the sense that they once they had stopped the fight, they did the right thing. But by stopping the fight, that does change the whole outcome. I mean, people have said after, Weidman was hurt, and so it was just a matter of time before Mousasi was going to finish him, even if Mergliata did not step in. Well, that may be true, but Chris Weidman is a wrestler, and how many times have we seen a wrestler get their bell rung or get concussed, and then just grab a takedown
Yeah. He was getting takedowns
and just sit there there until their head clears. It's sort of essentially use their own 5-minute recovery period just to hold the guy down. So we don't know that, and Weidman was winning the fight to that point. So we don't know. The results surely was influenced by Mergliata stopping it, but I can't blame him. I mean, I looked at that with my naked eye, and it looked to me like that was a foul.
Yeah. I would take issue with his positioning in the fight. There was a linear path he was in as opposed to a triangular path, right? We actually had it with the camera angle, the triangular path, but even then, to your point, it was hard to tell.
And it was one of those things they even on the slow motion, the first couple times, they couldn't get a great angle.
It was like a touchdown.
I know.
We're both feet in.
Exactly.
Was he inbounds?
And it was only
Did he have
on the
control?
one angle that you finally see his arm being yanked up off of the, his hand coming off the mat.
And I think we have to accept that referees are going to make those calls going forward. We can't say, well, part of our system is to make it so that referees never make a call like that. That's going to happen. Referees are, whether he was out of position or not, even the best replays, it took a while before we could figure out that was the wrong call. So referees are going to do that. It has to be, at that point, the process has to be streamlined. And again, like I said earlier, the fact that it took until was it Tuesday before we started really seeing any definitive word about whether that replay was legitimate or illegitimate? Yeah. I mean, that should have been something that was instantly done.
It's funny because we were going into this bout, Buffalo, returned to Buffalo first time since UFC 7. I went back before all this happened, like before the fights, and I wanted to see the old poster, and it said, no rules, it's like they're emphasizing no rules, and here you're 22 years later, you're not even sure what the rules are.
You sure it was the old poster you're looking at, not the new poster?
That's what I'm saying. It's kind of ironic.
So here's something that I posited on my radio show and on my live chat yesterday on the site. I said, look, and I want to be so clear about this. I have had a very, 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 very positive relationship with Mark Ratner over the years. I could not have more respect for the work he's done. Truly, behind the scenes, he might be one of the most important people in the history of mixed martial arts. That is not an exaggeration. I mean that. However, I don't know that he is best situated to serve in that Mike Pereira role on television, where you're guiding someone through this regulatory process that's unfolding. It wasn't until I had spoken to Herb Dean after the fact where a lot of things I thought were not okay were apparently totally okay. Number one, should the UFC, to the extent possible, bring in a referee who's not working that fight on the broadcast to clarify, an active working referee? And do you think that would have made a difference? Because look, if I'm the UFC, I'm thinking to myself, if you're a casual fan, somebody watched this and thought to themselves, well, they just make up stuff as they go along.
Now, you spoke to Herb Dean. I'm wondering, so Big John McCarthy was the guy that Mergliata had talked to.
In a process called polling that I didn't know existed. So
Big John McCarthy, I'm just going to guess then that he knew exactly the situation. He knew the bearings. He knew the bearings better than most people involved in this scenario.
Yes.
So if you've ever listened to Big John McCarthy before a fight, I've been in the locker room where he's went through the rules as somebody's getting their hand wrapped or something like that, and it's pretty fascinating how detailed he is and how clear he is on what's going on. I would love to see a guy like Big John McCarthy in that situation that you're speaking of, been able to bring clarity, because what happens is when you have the commentators, especially in this last one, you had Joe Rogan, and everybody's trying to figure it out. You had Dominic Cruz and Joe Rogan basically, almost opposing each other, and that's going to then.
It just was a very clarifying moment. I didn't know the rule.
I know.
Joe Rogan didn't know the rule. Dominic Cruz didn't know the rule.
Nobody did.
After the fact, it turns out Ray Longo didn't know the rule.
Right.
If none of us know the rule, we need some help.
That would have been a classic example. It would have been a classic example right there, especially because I really do believe McCarthy's been doing seminars and breaking down rules for people for so long. For a guy like that to bridge that gap immediately, to come on and do. I mean, I just. There's been many other instances where you need some kind of clarity as to what's going on, especially for anybody who doesn't really follow the sport, but with the new rules and everything else, I just feel like that'd be a big boon.
Yeah, if you're the UFC and you want to have your guy there, I have no problem with Mark Ratner being that guy, but I think he needs to study up on each state's regulations so that he should have known.
That's a Herculean task.
Well, really? I mean,
yes, really. Did you know about the weigh-in stuff? Did you know that a champion could get 2 extra hours? I mean, partly these commissions
I
are
think some of
making
that-
it up as they
I
go.
think some of that stuff was being made up of. Okay, so maybe you're right. So instead of that, they'll get like a non-working referee. They'll put Steve Mazzagatti in the broadcast position.
Or Jason Herzog or somebody
Isn't
who.
it crazy that all from the weigh-ins all the way to the end of the fight, that how many strange things came out of this commission? And
I want to talk about the wins just a second, but
But
let's.
the point is, somebody who is speaking as the voice of the voice of authority, it has to have done some studying. And you bring up, Mike Pereira and the NFL broadcast. I have watched many games where I've disagreed with his assessment of how something was going to be. And it turned out that I was right and he was wrong. So it's not like these guys are infallible, but you have to do a little more study.
But Mark Ratner is not a referee.
Yeah.
He's never been a referee. He's never going to be a referee. It's not the world he works in.
Right.
He has intimate knowledge of how commissions operate, and he has done tremendous
He's the guy
work.
with the minutia. He's heard all. He knows every in and out of what's going on.
Dominic Cruz used to be or is a fighter, and now he's a commentator. It's a direct pipeline. We need someone who is or used to be a referee to do that as well. That's just my sense of things. Now, here's the question: should I want to call you Chris. Chuck, I haven't slept well in days.
Hitting that bottle again.
Oh, son, you know me, player. Stay on that grind. Should Weidman, that's the question, should Weidman get a rematch with Mousasi?
This is a toughie. I mean, from a fan too, I kind of want to see it again. I really do. And I do feel like Chris Weidman, he might have been playing what he thought was he's a smart guy. He's a psych major. He knows what he's doing. He's a smart guy. I think in the chaos of what was going on, I think he thought he was doing the right thing by saying, I'm bewildered. I don't know. I'm speculating. I just think he was trying to milk that a little bit and see what was going to happen. But obviously this thing turned on him in a way that he didn't anticipate. I think he felt bad. It was in his home state of New York. There's no sense of resolution. So even from his angle, I feel like there should be a rematch. Mousasi was up for it. The first thing he said was, I'll give you a rematch, no problem. The fight wasn't bad. I mean, I thought both guys were doing what you thought they could do to each other. So it was, I would like to see it more emphatic and definitive, I guess.
Yeah, it was a good fight, and as a fan, I would love to see it. I don't know that Mousasi owes Weidman anything. In fact, we might not see Mousasi fight in the UFC again, right?
That's a good point.
If he does fight in the UFC, he probably wants to. If he negotiates a new contract, he's going to want a step up. I can't imagine he's going to say, give me this contract just so I can go fight the guy I just beat. So,
So now what happens to Chris Weidman? Let's assume he doesn't get the rematch. He has 3 losses in a row. This is the former champion, one of the guys who's had, Anderson Silva is obviously not just maybe the GOAT of mixed martial arts, but certainly that middleweight division. But when you look at other guys who've had title reigns, Rich Franklin, Evan Tanner for a time, I believe, and now certainly Chris Weidman, he's right behind there. He's among those Rich Franklin type guys. Where does he go from here? Does he go to 205, Jeff? Does he keep on the grind? Does he take an easy fight? What should he do here?
My sense says don't take an easy fight. Don't take a step backward. If you look, I understand you've talked about this before on the show about taking when you take a time off, having a little bit of an easier fight to just get yourself back on the going, and when you lose a couple fights. But in this kind of streak, I feel like he needs to make a statement. I think he needs to take on somebody who looks like a dangerous fight because look. You're on a 3-fight losing streak. You need to do something quick. Otherwise, if he takes an easy fight, then what happens after he wins that fight is he just ended his 3-fight losing streak against somebody who didn't belong in the cage with him. And that's the narrative that will be taken away from it. So I think, I don't have a name for you, but I would say, jump in against somebody who, someone formidable.
This game is such a, fight game is such a game of detours. We were looking at having Rockhold Weidman too, and I was very interested to see how that fight was going to look before, the whole thing happened and Bisping steps in and then basically takes the division a whole different direction. And I feel like Weidman, he got booked into that Romero fight, and he got a big one in terms of, I think he wanted it because he was going to be an MSG. That becomes a very traumatic loss for him, getting knocked out and everything. I could feel it going into this fight how much he wanted to win this thing. I know he wanted to prove that he was. Even in the lead up, I really believe when you heard Ray Longo saying, he was contemplating living with his parents again down. He just wanted the focus. He wanted to put the blinders on and just basically focus so hard on this fight. So it meant a lot to him, and to lose this way it's tough. I would almost.
What should he do?
That's the question. I would almost want to take somebody, like, get an easier fight at this point to get back on track, because I feel like he just keeps getting kicked a little further from his goal, but it's not entirely his fault. Some of the circumstances are dictating that he does these weird things, and not all of them are his fault. This particular one that just happened, you can't fault him. It's almost like you could call it a no contest, but I'm guessing it's going to stand as a loss on his record. So I'd like to see him get somebody where he can get well with, you know what I mean, and get back on track.
I think you got to build him back up, man. I mean, look, you got to go back to the Mike Chandler playbook here that Scott Coker did with Bellator.
That's a great example.
This is a guy who had also 3 losses in a row, and look where he is now. He's mentally centered, financially centered, and he's the champion again. Now, of course, Will Brooks left, but that's a separate story altogether. I just feel like life is telling you, take a step back. I mean, you don't want to take a step back. That's what the division is saying to him. It's not his time right now to make a push. There are moments in time where you're ready to make a push. He is so not ready right now.
It's hard.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm, I think in the other direction, but I definitely hear what you guys are saying.
It's hard too, because he was winning, both those last fights. It's just to lose those two. It's just you feel like he has it. So that's why I'm like, I feel like he could replenish himself, his confidence, everything that goes around the psychology if he just gets a win.
Mousasi, does he re-sign with the UFC?
That's a toughie, man.
Not should he? Shouldn't he? Does he?
He's in an interesting position. Obviously, he's coming off of another win, and he is positioned where he's at. But he's been fairly outspoken about some of why he's disgruntled with these title shots and what's been going on, the politics behind these things. He does know Scott Coker. He's fought for Scott Coker before. There's a lot going on there. You almost feel like this is going to be very interesting. Now, I can't imagine a scenario where the UFC doesn't try to get this guy, because to me, he's also coming into his own in a personality. It's finally translating. I don't know if you guys noticed over the last year or so, it took him forever to get some traction that way, where people were actually understanding his sense of humor and starting to pay attention, whereas some of his videos are starting to go a little more viral and stuff like that. I'd be a little surprised if the UFC doesn't recognize the potential that he has right now and what he could present to them over the next few fights and everything else, and didn't sign him. But I do think Coker's going to make a big effort to get him.
Yeah, I think part of it will be determined this coming Saturday when Jacare fights. He's also at the end of his contract. Now, both of those guys are very familiar to Scott Coker, and we've heard that quote about Bellator trying to build the 27 Yankees, and they would go a long way by bringing both those guys in. Suddenly, you've got two of the two of the 4 or 5 best middleweights in the planet in your company. 2 of the 3, they already have 2 of the 3 best light heavyweights. With John Jones on the shelf and not eligible, they've got 2 of the 3 best light heavyweights in the planet on their, and so they're trying to. They're not the 27 Yankees yet. They're probably more like the 2017 Yankees. But they're building something, and so I think that it will be determined somewhat, because if by Jacare's performance on Saturday, if he does something that makes the UFC want to sign him and make that the priority, that might free up something, Mousasi's opportunity over in Bellator. But if I'm Bellator, I'm going for both of them.
Now, the Jacare one we'll get to a little bit later, because I want to talk about Fox 24. My view is that they might get one, and I don't know which one, Mousasi, Jacare. I don't think they'll get both. But if they got both, what a major coup that would be, a real transformative moment. Let's stick with New York so we can finish it up in the interest of time. We can spend all day talking about the instant replay situation, that it turns out there's nothing essentially what the problem in New York was that there's nothing governing it. Nothing prohibiting it, but nothing governing it either. And that, to me, is the problem. If you're a state like New York and you're going to accept UFC title fights and extraordinarily important main events, and the organization, as I asked Larry Hazard about this on my show as well, it's the organization's financial and logistical responsibility to provide it, but that's well within the UFC's purview. It is irresponsible not to have it. It is outright negligent. This is not Cage Fury Fighting Championships, and even that's important. This is the highest level of the sport. It doesn't get bigger. If you're a state like New York and you're hosting Conor McGregor fights, it is imperative that you have instant replay. But that brings me to a different regulatory issue. Towelgate, also known as, someone put this on my live chat, Towel 7, which I really enjoyed as well. All right, so we all know the story. DC leans on a towel after coming out, apparently. I can't prove that's what happened, but it looks that way. Shaves off 1 point.
What happened? You could see it.
Well, I mean, the commission, this is my point. So The fans reached out to the media and were like, why aren't you guys going to say anything about this? And I'm thinking to myself, what is it you want us to do? We went directly to the commission and we said, hey, did you see him lean on the towel? And they're like, I didn't see anything. And we're like, word. See, here's this video we have. You can watch it. He's like, you know what? Gotta let bygones be bygones, player. Sauced up, chilling in the cut. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's the end of this. Here's the bigger question. Should the UFC, with all of this happening, go back to New York?
Well, they will. They're going to go back to New York because.
Okay, but if they're going to, in what capacity?
Yeah, that's the question. Because I feel like, you know, obviously things change as time goes on. This is the fight game in general. But when they were lobbying to get in there, it was like, we're going to go there 4 times in the first year, and we're going to make a commitment to going there every year, you know, every year beyond. Particularly maybe one big show at MSG. I think that'll stay intact because I feel like that's still the fight mecca, and they still want to be associated with that, the press and everything that generates. Now what show do they bring there? I don't know, because I feel like there's got to be some cold feet happening with the UFC at this point, because each time they've gone there, we've had some kind of strange happening one way or another. I mean, just about, I don't know if there was anything too big in Albany. I don't really recall, but
At 205, I mean, it went mostly without a hitch.
Let's put it this way. Even at 205...
Although Rashad got pulled.
Rashad got pulled, and even the Gastelum Cerrone situation where you basically had a guy, if they'd have known the protocol, if they'd have known what to do, the fight could have been saved.
Good point.
If they just known, like, hey, I'm not going to make weight, let's figure this out beforehand. But nobody knew this, so the fight wasn't saved. And I mean, it's just stuff like that. I think that's going to give you some pause, because that card did lose some of its value just off of those things. I think you're going to... I don't know what the solution is, other than hopefully New York starts to educate at least itself, and then, you know, the fighters and you get on the same page as they come in there. But the UFC is for sure going to return. But I would be hesitant to go there 4 times a year. I'd certainly be hesitant to even go there beyond MSG at this point.
Yeah, they're going to come. They're going to come back. The dollar bills are very green here in New York. They are all about making money, and this is a mecca. This is a mecca of sports. When they first came here, there was talk about this being like the home away from home, you know, as opposed to their fighting out in Vegas. They're also going to bring a lot of fights out to New York, and yeah, the commission has been problematic for sure. But you know, we see a lot of fights out in Vegas, and even though a lot of the stuff that happens, you know, in the cage or in the weigh-ins has not been an issue in Vegas, we all know the commission out there is the biggest clown show that exists. So it's a whole it's a whole other level of it here. It's affecting things a little in a different way, but these are things that at some point they will smooth it out, and it'll be better. Well, out there it's more kind of systematic, and they don't get better.
Just imagine, you know, you look at Bellator's show that's coming up.
Oh, that's going to be.
That's what I'm saying.
That Bellator show is going to be a donk orgy.
I think you're right. But it's going to be very fun to cover from the standpoint of I don't know what kind of shenanigans this whole thing's going to produce. But
real quickly before we move on from this whole regulatory topic, I kind of jumped around here a little bit. I apologize to the viewers, but it's just been on my mind a little bit. We talked about instant replay. We talked about Towelgate, Towel 7, and just a whole mess of regulation. But the other thing that sort of is at issue here is the two-hand down rule. Now, it was interesting, at the last meeting of the Association of Boxing Commissions, New Jersey was the lone state saying, we don't think this is a good idea. And I spoke to Larry Hazard, of course, who's from New Jersey, and his basic premise was, look, the unified rules are pretty good. If you're going to tamper with them, you better have a good reason to do that. In the end, I think he's a little too conservative with his approach, but I see his logic. We have enshrined in law how rules are changed, which means it's going to be imprecise, difficult to come by, and just a laborious act. If you're going to change it, you better make sure your change is good. And to me, the 2-hand down versus 1-hand down, what a disaster. This doesn't clarify anything at all. Jeff, was New Jersey right all along?
Well, of course, New Jersey's always right.
Look at this guy.
Come on,
Look at
come
this
on,
guy.
hey, come on. You know, I'm from Jersey. New Jersey's been doing this a long time, and that in itself, we contrasted to New York, which is a new commission for MMA, and they're making all kinds of mistakes. You know, not to say that any place is infallible, but New Jersey's been doing this a little longer time, and I think that they have a little better handle on this. Look, I think that the bottom line is this whole thing about being a grounded fighter is about protecting fighters. And it's not about saying, well, I've got, this guy's about to knee me, so let me put my hands down so that he can't do it. That's not the spirit of the law. And so we have to find, if they're going to change things, they have to change things in such a way as it protects the fighter better and does not create another loophole for somebody to, I'm not going to say cheat, because Weidman wasn't cheating by putting his hands down. That was the rule. But
It was actually in compliance.
to game the system in a sense, that's not what we should be doing. We shouldn't be creating another way for them to do that.
I agree 100%. Actually, it reminds me of the NFL's rule when they keep messing with the kickoffs, and pretty soon, as they're trying to create more touchbacks for health reasons, and yet now everybody's perfecting the little pooch kick into the 5-yard line. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, you're still getting the same thing. It's just, you're tinkering. You're right when you say it's just not in the spirit of the safety. They're not. Right. You have to get it a little more essential than what they're doing. Just have, the two hands rule is not definitively changing anything in my mind. So I think you got to go a little deeper than that. And I mean, it's just going to. We'll have to wait and see kind of how some of the other things pan out. But that was the first glaring example of why. Why you look at it and you're like, well, wait, let's really think about what did we change here and why. So it'll be interesting to see.
Before we close the book on UFC 210 and move into this next weekend's event, we have to talk about Cormier versus Johnson. A bizarre fight. It went even better for Cormier the second time than it did the first, despite the fact that he did not look all. I mean, he never looks like Schwarzenegger in his prime, but boy, he doesn't even look like Schwarzenegger now. So that was a bit of a problem, and I noticed, but it didn't really matter because Anthony Johnson retired after the fact. Let's start there and work backwards. Now look, if a guy wants to retire, you would be immoral to get in his way. It would be unethical. When he's done, he's done. And I thought his send-off was incredibly classy, and I'm happy for him. Here's my only thing, and I'm not saying this is true. I am merely going to ask you, Jeff. He didn't really put up much of a fight. Now, he did train. He made weight easily. He had pants on. He made 203.8. Right. Like, he looked shredded. So he did all the work. He ran. He monitored his diet. And I'm not saying he threw the fight. Not at all. But he didn't have that same competitive zeal. Do the fans have a right to feel cheated?
I don't think so. I think a lot of fighters, let's look at the alternative. Let's say that he did not go into the fight thinking he was going to retire, and then he goes out there and he loses, and then in the spur of the moment, and we've seen this happen, guys retire in the cage at the end of a loss, and it was kind of an impulsive thing, and then sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you just know when the time is right. I mean, I know that Dana White all the time says, well, when you know you're going to retire, you better get out of there. Well, look, he still threw that head kick that wobbled Cormier, and then threw another one that if Cormier didn't duck, and I don't think he was ducking to avoid that head kick. I think he just was ducking instinctively. If he doesn't duck, that second one is going to lay him out, and Anthony Johnson is the light heavyweight champion of the world. So I don't think that, it's not as though he obviously strategically blew it. There's no other way of putting it. You don't wrestle with DC like that. That was silly, and I don't really understand what he was thinking. But in terms of him not putting up an effort, I will say this: once DC gets him gets him on the mat and DC's on top of him, this happened in both fights, he doesn't put up much of a fight.
But choosing to wrestle him in the second round right off the bat.
If he'd went out on a shield, and his words were different in the end. Like if he went out there and said, hey, you know what, I wanted to win this. You knew he went in there and had a war with Cormier, and afterwards he's like, I really wanted to win this because I wanted to get the belt and I wanted to do this. I'm going to retire. That would have been a little different, but to be very inexplicable strategic approach to going against Daniel Cormier, and then to be like, man, I'm tired of rolling around with guys. I'm trying to move on.
I get it.
I totally get it. But I'm like, if you'd known that beforehand, if you'd known that Anthony Johnson was going to retire one way or another, that would have changed everything and how you'd have perceived this fight. Right. It's just he knew it, and nobody else knew it, and it's. And even as it unfolds, though, you look at it and you think, and I agree, he headhunted him a couple times. He was trying to get that knockout. It just didn't seem like he was going to sell out for that knockout. He wasn't going to do anything, crazy.
You can't watch that performance and be like, that's the best he has to offer.
True.
It's definitely not.
I saw R.J. Clifford had tweeted out something along the lines of, look at these rankings. The three top guys at 205 behind the champion Cormier were guys that were knocked out by Johnson in a total of 7 minutes and some change. And you think, this guy is just this is what he can do, and if he's motivated, it's a strange thing with Anthony Johnson. I mean, he's so good at his best. I think he could beat anybody, obviously. That's it. I mean, he
has a power so mighty that no one is immune.
Yeah. If I had not seen this fight unfold one time before, I might have kind of gone along with what you were suggesting about this.
I'm not saying I agree with the characterization, but I had fans reach out to me and being like, "Dude, what was that?"
Yeah, but he saw the exit door, and this is the way he competed. So I can see that people jumped to that conclusion. But it's kind of the way that he fought Cormier the first time.
A little bit.
And the thing is that he doesn't fight anybody else that way. So I just wonder whether sometimes in sports, various athletes, various teams just have the other one's number or psych them out. It's almost as though Cormier has him psyched out for whatever reason, and I'm not quite sure what that's about.
When you think about it, you couldn't have had like a worse sort of feeling, right, than watching him fight that way, to lose the fight and then retire, because there was a hydra of 3 names really, and you had those 3 guys and then a gulf between anybody else at 205, and you think, how's this going to play out? What's going to come out of it? And instead, there's 2 guys now left standing in the top of that division, and 1 guy retires. Not only does he put in that performance that you paid for and whatever else, and I'm not trying to discount. I think he gave it his all. I'm not trying to say he didn't, but it's what kind of news is that? He loses a fight in a fight that you can't explain, and then he retires. It's like the fight game is so bizarre that way. It just leaves you so empty.
Hey, but the Rams are getting a really good running back.
I know. Like he's going to be the quarterback coach of the Rams. It's like, oh my God, please put a bullet in my mouth. Very, very quickly. I know we're running short on time because we've got to move this along. I will sort of ask how you're going to remember Rumble, but what is on the good side of things? Let's say something nice about Rumble. What is the best way to remember him in a way that sheds a positive light?
Man, I mean, the first time I ever talked to him, I think was before UFC 104 in Los Angeles when he was fighting Yoshida, I believe it was. And I just remember
Yoshioki Yoshida. That's a blast from the past.
Yeah, and imagine that matchup now. But just talking to him, I remember him being as down to earth and funny. Like he was so lighthearted. He was in his car, and it felt like if I wanted to talk to him for an hour, he would just shot the breeze with me for an hour. He was that guy. I think he always had that element to him. But I mean, honestly, I'm just going to remember him cracking mountain faces, man. Like just when he laid that leather on you, the way guys fell. I mean, you look back at a couple of those knockouts, and they still will stand the test of time. I think that you could show any of those. He could have a whole highlight reel of those, and they would all stand up forever.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this enigma about this guy. Obviously, we know there's that dark side, the domestic violence. Things that happened
which is part of his record.
Years ago, and then even more recently, the thing where in the gym where he took some woman's yoga mat and threw it away and sort of got in her face. So he definitely has that dark element, and yet I've never witnessed any of that. All I've ever seen, either by talking to him or seeing him on television or seeing him in the cage, is this incredible gentleman. And it's kind of it's hard to wrap my brain around. We take people and we think of them in a certain way. We say, oh, this guy's got a domestic violence rap, and he's been arrested for this, he's convicted of this, he did this, and you kind of like think that they're all going to be like War Machine or something. This is a guy who's not that way. He's just this incredible gentleman, and also when he starts swinging. And this is a guy who was fighting as a welterweight.
That's the craziest part. I mean, in terms of his career, it's
the thing that stands out. The thing that stands out to me about him is just that you get a lot of people in life who they're fuck ups, and 99% of the time they never make any use of a second chance if they get one at all. And he did. Yeah. He really did. He put his foot on the gas and he changed, and he did. I think he went as far as he probably could go, which is pretty damn far.
I think he stays retired. That's the question.
Yeah, I want to get into the DC heel turn stuff, but we're running a little bit short on time. I want to move along, but this is the question that I want to ask because it's now the 13th of April. So January, February, March, gone, right? First quarter of the year is over. It's not been good. It's so not been good. Now, that's not to say important fights haven't happened. That's not to say there haven't been things that have been fun or interesting. I'm not saying it's been all terrible. And yes, we will get to some fun things later in the show. But geez, Jeff, I'll start with you. First quarter of 2017 in mixed martial arts, been a little bit nubby.
Yeah, there's not been a lot of great stuff going on. I sometimes wonder whether, how sometimes when you're preparing for something and it's a really important big thing to you, you kind of get so you get like almost lost in yourself, and you can't quite produce something really good, whether it be something in your own personal life or professionally or whatever. And here's the UFC, which just last summer got sold for this monster amount of money, and then they go out and they get Conor McGregor, fighting in a big card, and then they had the Rousey fight, all these huge pay-per-view things that went on toward the end of last year, and then all of a sudden it's as though like the spigot kind of gets shut off, and there's like drip, drip, drip. Now in the meantime, there have been some pretty damn good fights in the last few months. Sure. But in terms of the event, there's not been that sort of capital E event that's happened since then. And I'm just here to say that as long as they're feeding some good fights, I'm going to be content with that. It's not going to make those guys in the bean counters over at WME, IMG. They're not too happy, I'm sure. They want the big, the capital E events, but I'll bide my time until the big fights start happening again.
Like prohibition, man. Like very dry time. You go back to UFC 208, and that was the first event that was going to happen, and you look at that card, and I really, honestly, and then I even wrote it at the time, I mean, that was one of the worst fight cards to attend live, just the way the crowd, it was in Brooklyn, and the way the crowd just lost interest. I hadn't seen a fight card like that in a long time. So that's your first pay-per-view. The second, and the one that everybody was looking forward to, is going to have Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. What happens? The fight falls apart at the 11th hour, so we lose that. So then you get an event that turns out pretty blah. You get a main event between Wonder Boy and Woodley that's pretty.
That fight rocked.
but should have been good.
You get UFC 210, and the two top fights, and then the way we just described, it's just the three pay-per-views from that, and then you go to the Bellator side of things. Fedor falling out of his, the Mitrione thing falling out with his fight. You get guys, McGregor, no hope of him coming back because there's this thing going on with Mayweather potentially down the line. Either that, but he's also having a kid, so he's just out of the equation. I honestly can't think of a more, I don't want to say hopeless, but it's verging on like real deserty terrain here for this first quarter of the year. Unlike any that I can remember in the last several years. I mean, it's just... so
then the question is why? Is it a general malaise? We know the sport boom and busts. I'm not saying we're in a bust period, but certainly not we're more at the trough than the peak of the wave. What is it? Is it just a moment in time, or is there a larger concern that you might have?
Well, my larger concern is that the UFC has put all of its eggs in the basket of like I said, capital E events. Everything is all about the big stars. And so when your big star, Conor McGregor, is going to have a baby with his wife or fiance, and he's not available, then you lose something. When Ronda Rousey comes out for her big comeback fight and gets smoked and then just disappears into the horizon, you lose another one. John Jones shows up at an event last weekend, but he's not eligible to fight. He has not got his grades up to come back to the classroom, as Daniel Cormier would say. And GSP says he's coming back, but have we seen it? It's almost like all these things that are pending to happen. Conor McGregor will come back at some point, and they'll make a boatload of money off of his fight with Mayweather. It's
been buzzkill, man, because even the ones you get happy about, Cyborg, for instance, Cyborg, and then she goes through some moments. Every single thing that you kind of get excited about either falls through or has some snag. Right. It's just, I think it's just a point in time primarily, but there are obviously, they need to start generating bigger stars again because, Ronda Rousey, I think that's the last of Ronda Rousey. I don't think she comes back. And McGregor, I don't know in what form he comes back if he does, because if he's getting a 9-figure payday, how does he even conceive of coming back? I don't even understand.
You're going to go from getting 9 figures to, I'm sure, all right, 7 or maybe 8 to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. Like that's a substantial drop off.
That's a big
lower pay and higher risk.
Well, you look at his career, and everything has been escalation. It's been like he has to trump himself. Yep. There's no trumping the Mayweather. You know what I mean? Like unless he loses in such a way that he's embarrassed, he has to go back and or something like that.
Well, you say you need bigger stars, and I agree with that to some extent. But when you start creating a star-driven promotion, then you've got these guys way up here, and then everything else is a big drop-off to the next best thing. And so it becomes like a two-tiered kind of sport. And to me, let's just get back to basics. And sort of like when you guys were talking about, I was disagreeing with you back then about Weidman, what does he got to do? He's got to sort of drop back and build things back up. That's what I would look at the UFC that way and say, put on the right fights. Don't think about, don't put on like Michael Bisping versus Dan Henderson fights where we're just going to go for the money. No, put on a fight that's a real fight. That's a fight where the deserved guy gets a title shot. Or look, Ferguson and Khabib. That was just bad luck. To some extent, the Wonder Boy Woodley fight was bad luck because they had put on a great fight the first time they fought, and the second one was kind of a dud. So just sort of get back to basics, find the right people to fight the right guy. They've got a big roster of good fighters, and just churn out good fights. Maybe you're not going to make those, you're not going to sell 1.5 million pay-per-views, but to me, that's not really the point. I mean, I think for most people who are watching this show and who follow the sport closely, they just want to see really great fights. I don't think they really care that much about the 1.5 million pay-per-views. That's sort of more for the extended audience. And
spoken like a man who didn't spend $4 billion.
Well, here's the thing for me.
Right.
I more or less feel like it's just a moment in time. I am anticipating a rebound. Now, how big that rebound is, I don't know. We can all debate about it. Maybe when John Jones comes back, maybe somehow Ronda Rousey isn't done. Maybe she's got one more. I think there's an interesting rebound. The problem for me, and this is where I'm a little bit concerned, is between two major promotions, Bellator and UFC, we've gone 3 full months, and no one has the resources to guarantee an event. That's a little frightening. You mean to tell me we can go through a quarter of a year and neither of you have the ability collectively to put together an event? This is what I meant before. It's the one thing when the Connors and the Rondas are gone. These are unicorns, man. Like when they're gone, it could be years, if ever, we get someone like that. But what about the upper middle class guys? What about the guys who can do 600, 7,000 buys? To credit, overweight Rampage versus Mo did well on Spike TV, even though the fight kind of sucked. But there's something there. But Chuck, am I onto something on this one? Or maybe I'm an alarmist. Like, I find it a little bit problematic with this one.
I think you're right. I mean, and you're right too. I mean, the bottom line is they need to get more of those types. The John Jones, obviously he's a big talent. He just went through so much in his personal life that bleeds into his career. And GSP, coming back helps for sure. I mean, these guys but they need to generate more of those guys. They're not going, like you just mentioned, I just don't think you're going to be able to find a Ronda Rousey again.
But see, this is the thing. He was bringing up with the 1 million buy pay-per-view.
Yeah.
On the horizon, we have UFC 211, which on paper looks amazing. Yeah. All I'm asking for, and I think all the fans are asking for, is I just need another UFC 206. Just give me a night where I'm like, man, I put down money for this. I am so glad I did. Yeah, right. I don't think we've done that, or in the case of Bellator, I sat aside a Friday or Saturday night. It was worth my while. That's, I think, all I'm reaching for.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, to turn the page on a positive direction, what are you most looking forward to? And I don't mean speculatively. I mean, what is planned in the calendar that you're looking forward to? I'll say, we talked about the donkery that's going to be afoot. I am looking forward to the Bellator show in New York City. No, I mean that. There are good fights on that card. Yeah. I'm excited about Lorenz Larkin. Of course, Michael Chandler. I want to see what Bellator does as a show. That, to me, has got me pumped.
Yeah.
I'll start with you, Chuck.
Well, I mean, even this Fox card coming up on this weekend is not bad. When you look at the depth of it, where Roy Nelson is on the prelims and stuff, like, hey, now this starts to feel like something. Like I feel like we have some fight cards, if they stay intact, obviously, that start to resemble the way we got used to, I guess, when we were getting lots of those types of cards, I guess, last year. But when I would say the Dallas card really it looks pretty good. You got 2 title fights. Anytime you get Jacare, on a card, and he's not even talked about feature really in this thing against, and you get Masvidal, not Jacare, Masvidal and Damian Maia.
Yep.
And that's not even one of your big fights. I mean, that's the way it should. That's a great third fight. You know what I mean? Like the center fight on there. So I mean, I don't have any problem with some of the ones that are kind of coming up. I haven't really looked too beyond that. Like I don't know. Kind of the ones that are happening beyond that. There's so many events these days, but
we don't even really know.
Yeah. So I mean, I know a lot of them aren't filled out, but I mean, to me, even this one this weekend and that Dallas card, to me, those start to resemble good. I feel like there's hope in that direction.
Jeff, you too?
I would say that, yeah. Well, for one thing, I'm definitely looking forward to Stipe defending his belt again. I've
And their
I've
first
always-
fight was amazing.
I've always been a fan of the heavyweights. I just, especially not the big, fat, sloppy heavyweights, but, the guys who are really,
Jeff's over here fat shaming elite athletes.
Yeah, like me, right? Yeah, any guy that's like, it's less in worse shape than me I don't like to see him. No, but I like seeing Stipe fight. That's one guy I love to watch. I guess this past weekend we had talked about this on one of the shows recently about whether you're really excited to see Cormier and Jones go at it again, whether it was better to see Cormier or Rumble against Jones in his comeback. And I was in the Rumble camp because it would be something new.
I was in the DC camp.
But now after seeing what happened, it reinvigorated my interest in that. It's a fight that I really want to see happen again. And especially, since he won't have a tune-up fight probably if they make that one.
Right.
And so that would kind of, I feel like he did, Jones needs to be brought down a peg a little bit.
I love the idea of that fight. I do.
We can shoehorn the DC conversation in here. I'll let you. I'm sorry to cut you off here, Chuck. I am all in on DC Jones too, boy.
I am too. And I think, but it's just so bizarre because we've tried this 3 times, right? Like we've only got one fight out of it so far. So you're going to be going into a 4th time. It's almost like this is one of those moments where you actually almost dread a little bit of the buildup because it has been built up forever. It just keeps going. It loses something. There's an exhaustion there. But I will say that I'm more excited now, I think, than I was going into this past weekend, just because Jones was there. There's something about the sincerity of his heel turn. You were talking about Cormier. It's so lived in. Like, it's so sincere, the way he presents himself. You don't feel like he's putting on airs. He's just who he is at this point. So when he's calling out, when he's talking about
yes
John
and no.
Jones,
I'm not friends with Daniel Cormier, but I've interacted with him when the cameras weren't on.
Yeah.
I know MMA fans won't believe this, but the dude is legitimately super friendly.
Oh yeah.
Way more so than the average fighter.
But it's like he's being friendly even to Jones in a weird way. He's just like,
he's being a goofball. I think that part of it is the honest presentation.
But I mean, he's trying to. He's basically like, hey man, I would love to fight him, but you know what? It doesn't define me anymore. It's like I'm past. It's like he's very comfortable where he is and who he is. And that to me is fun. There's a little bit of tweak or an evolution to how he's presenting himself that I like. Then I like the idea that Jones has, he has somebody to come back to if he chooses. That's you were talking about tune-up fights, and it's kind of strange because now you're like, does Jones even want to jump right in there with Cormier at this point, or does he want to kind of gradually get to him?
Well, he doesn't want it. He wants to jump right in there. I think he doesn't want any tune-up fights.
So let's talk about. Some I think very positive news. This Saturday, UFC on Fox 24. Demetrious Johnson in the main event will face Wilson Hayes. It's not Reyes. It's not Reyes. It's Hayes.
How does he not have the nickname Purple Hayes?
That's a good one. That's a good one. Roberto Godoy black belt could not be a nicer guy as well. I don't think most people think it's competitive. I am never going to count out a guy as good on the mat as Wilson Hayes. You can never count these victories. This is mixed martial arts. But if, in fact, Demetrious Johnson gets it, he will tie Anderson Silva's record of 10 title defenses. Most people anticipate that he will. Okay, Chuck, let's figure this out. If he gets the 10 title defenses, whose 10 title defenses were better?
Man, that is tough. I would still say that Anderson Silva's, only because if you look, there's just not enough bodies at 125, so sometimes he, by default, like even this last one, they had to run a tournament and it ends up being Tim Elliott, and you're not discounting.
Who gave him his toughest fight, probably.
Yeah, no, but you look at that and you think, they've had to dredge up some of his challenges, and you could say the same a little bit for Anderson Silva. He had a couple of weird ones in there, but you look at even Damian Maia now, and you're like, wow, that was a more compelling fight. It would be more compelling, and if you thought of it now than it was then, and Patrick Cote and some of these. But I still think when you look back, Chael. And Chael came along, and he was a real threat, even though his record wasn't great. He was a dogged wrestler who was going to impose that, and that was something that was very compelling. And you knew that was maybe a vulnerability of and you just go through those. You just kind of go through those, and I think I would go with Silva ultimately, but I would say that Silva looked vulnerable in fights. So Dan Henderson. The first round was Dan Henderson's when they fought. You know, if Dan Henderson keeps doing that rather than saying, all right, let's bite down on the mouthpiece and swing, you know, who knows how that fight would have came out. I feel like Demetrious Johnson has put a gulf between him and everybody else, and that's the weird thing, just how he's evolved and his preparation and everything. That's what gets you. Maybe he doesn't get the fanfare he deserves, but it's amazing because this division was built really. I know that he kind of came down from bantamweight. It was built for the guys like Ian McCall, who are natural flyweights, the guys like Joseph Benavidez, who I think they really had in mind when they made this division, and he has just ran with it. He's made it. He's the singular god of this division. He's fought all those guys, most of them twice, and he's put them all away. I mean, he's separated himself so far. To me, his run's more impressive in that sense.
Jeff?
I'm actually going with Demetrious Johnson. Anderson Silva is amazing, but there was so much of his fighting style that involved just kind of standing there looking lackadaisical. I know that this was part of the psychology of the way he fought, but it was just not aesthetically pleasing for me to watch. There was always some highlight moment. You know, you watch, how many millions of times have you watched those few little parts where he was fighting Forrest Griffin, and Griffin throws the one punch and then
dodges.
And then bang, 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 it's over.
That wasn't even one of his titles.
And that was not even a title. And that was also an interesting thing because 4 different fights during his run
Right,
were not.
so the Travis Lutter fight was supposed to be a title defense, but Lutter missed weight. That would have been 11.
And then he had 3 light heavyweight
And then the
fights.
James Irvin, Stephan Bonner, and Forrest Griffin.
Right.
But I will say this. I mean, James Irvin, Stephan Bonner. I mean, people talk about how Demetrious Johnson's the people he beat were not as impressive. Other than the fact that those are bigger guys, I don't think that Stephan Bonner or James Irvin or certainly are not even at the level, I would not say, of some of the guys most of the guys that Demetrious has beaten. Demetrious has been, he puts his foot to his pedal to the floor, and he just goes. And the level to which he has risen has been incredibly impressive to me. Look at how he won the title. A really, really slim split decision victory over Benavidez. And then a little over a year later, he goes out and fights the same guy. And there were a lot of people who say, well, now Benavidez is going to come out and assert himself and win this title. And within 2 minutes, Benavidez was knocked out.
I do think, too, Silva was more finicky, really, when it came down to it. He always was like, I don't know if that guy deserves it, but Kung Lee, that's a guy I think should. He would always throw out these names. He always was maybe lobbying for guys and stuff like that. Whereas Demetrious Johnson, I feel like, literally would fight anybody.
And he would never stop fighting. I mean, one of the most impressive things to me, and it's kind of meaningless when you look at his record. It was a victory. It was going to be a victory anyway. But when he fought, it was a Haraguchi, and he's 1 second from winning the fight by a probably, I don't even know what the decision would have been, but a wide margin of victory by decision. But instead, he locks in the armbar, and he wins that fight at 4:59 of round 5. And I thought, that is a fighter that I want to watch.
He's got a little bit of that strange mojo something. Because I was at that fight, and I remember thinking that I was like, well, there's more to this guy than you realize. I mean, I think he's got a flair for dramatics that, come out in different ways. Just even that Henry Cejudo fight, he's always got a little bit of something different going on. And then it's...
Yeah, I mean,
the thing for me is, number one, we already talked about it, that he had these fights up a weight class, not just up a weight class, 20 pounds up in a weight class. Well, yes, 20 pounds. And so he still had success there, including against a former champion during his middleweight title reign. That's pretty ridiculous. The other thing about it is, I don't know which way to look at it. It's sort of a chicken and the egg scenario. One of the common features of elite champions has been that they retain their title despite someone putting it on them. Like Chael Sonnen pushed him to the brink. Kazuyuki Fujita pushed Fedor to the brink. And they fought their way out of it. Now, Demetrious Johnson started off a bit of a rough road, but once he got going, he's never really been pushed. So it's like, has he not been pushed because the guys aren't as good, or because he has less weaknesses, or because the guys at middleweight were better? I don't know how to settle that debate. That part to me is a little bit unclear. But I kind of want to transition the conversation to another level. And every time we talk about Demetrious Johnson, everybody always says, what can he do to be more popular? Blah, 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 blah. Let me be unequivocal with this. I don't give an F anymore. I'm done policing his behavior to get more out of it for the casual audience. Would it be nice if he was more popular? Of course. Would it be nice if he could turn that Twitch stream into some kind of service? I don't know, like it blew up or something. Yes, that would all be nice. But I don't care. Here's my view on it, Jeff. I believe if you're a hardcore fan, you get rewarded at times because things pass by the casual fans' radar that they don't pick up on. UFC 206 was that. Now, they eventually repurposed it after the fact because it was so good. But you got to be there live witnessing it because you don't miss things. If you're a hardcore fan, your reward is that you get to watch a guy like this for free when everyone else passes. Is he the most popular? I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. It's like wondering why do people boo Daniel Cormier? Who cares? Who cares? People are going to do what they do. People booed Mighty Mouse and Benavidez the night of that Mighty Mouse won the title. I remember there was in Toronto. I remember it was on the undercard of the Jones Vitor fight, and people were booing, and it was an amazing fight. Now, I will say this, my secret for all those, I'll tell you, all you folks out there who are watching tonight and who are going to be watching Saturday night, DVR the fight, watch it in slow motion later on, and you will actually gain your appreciation for what this guy does. I mean, I've done that, just as a lark. And some of the stuff that he is so quick, his footwork is so precise. There is stuff that he does that I just don't even get while I'm watching it live. Later on, I'm like watching things slow. I'm like, man, this guy is just doing amazing stuff. Now, I know you can say the same thing for Anderson Silva and a lot of other guys who just do amazing things. But Mighty Mouse is a guy who, he operates at the speed of light. And it's just, it's a beautiful thing. So
I basically have a column coming out tomorrow about this, but
did I ruin it?
No, not at all. You hit on the vein of what it's in. It's just that he is more of a fight fan's secret, right? Like, because he's not going to transcend for whatever reason. I don't know if it's because it's a smaller weight class, if it's just he doesn't have the charisma or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. The people who pay attention to him can appreciate him, and I mean appreciate him in the way that like you would look at an old cult film or something. If you're you know what I'm saying? You look at, there's always these things there's some B-side stuff that you love, or you can old record collections, but you're like, this is the record. Everybody loves that one, but this is the real record.
Right.
That's how he feels.
Right.
He's a vintage guy who basically brings it every single time. And
He's that hot mixtape off the street.
He's 100% that. But who's going to love that? It's going to be the people who see him every time out, and it's like an appreciation that you can share in it. I don't really care at this point either if the wider world cares about it or not. You get the essential vitamins of what he's doing. You know what I mean?
He's like, look, if you don't like, I don't think you have to like Demetrious Johnson's style of fighting or him personally to be a legitimate hardcore fan. But what I would say is, generally speaking, that you like him speaks highly of your fight palette, right? If you have a good fight palette, it's going to be very difficult to say, I don't like Demetrious Johnson's style of fighting. Possible, but unlikely. Right. Do you think he locks up do you think he locks up the tying of the record?
I do.
Yeah.
I know that I don't. I saw the Vegas odds. It was something way out of whack.
Let me walk that question back a little bit, and here's what I mean. I suspect he'll win, and I know we don't typically do predictions on the show, but here's what I mean. I saw like some of the promos, and he's like, I'm out there trying to be the perfect fighter, and I get that. I get that that's your next goal. That seems a little bit Icarus flying to the sun for me. I got a little bit of a bad vibe from that. Not enough to pick against him, but are you detecting any of those concerns?
Well, he's said something similar going into a couple of his other fights, and I've had that exact same feeling, but so far I haven't seen it translate in there. Because there is a part of you that's always like, complacency is hard. So in the fight game, it's stupid because the moment you get complacent, somebody comes in there and especially when you're a target like him who's been on top for as long as he is, the only guy who's been on top. So those are always red flags. They're always red flags whoever says it. But for some reason, when he says it, I feel like he's able to pack it in such a way that it doesn't affect it hasn't yet affected him. This is a guy though who is fighting Wilson that I think it's one of those things that I feel like he's underrated. And so you get into the situation where you're like, if anybody was going to go in there and surprise him, it's a guy like this. I was just kind of looking back. I mean, he's 10-2. And since Demetrious Johnson's been on his run, since the Dominic Cruz loss, essentially, 5-6 years ago, he's 10-2 during that time, too. He's no slouch. I just feel like, and he, like you said, if he goes to the ground, you just never know. He can hit hard. This is one of those fights. But I do think that Demetrious Johnson is just so smart, and I think he's instinctually so sound. And his movement is so like in conjunction with how his brain thinks and everything that it's hard for me to predict that he would lose a fight like this. But I think he'll solve him.
Yeah, I also feel as though he's going to win this fight for a few reasons. One, he's not a guy who goes out there and egotistically says, I'm going to try to beat this guy at his game. He doesn't go out there and say, well, this guy is a black belt jiu-jitsu, so I'm going to go out there and challenge him to a jiu-jitsu match. Demetrious Johnson is going to fight his own fight. He's not going to go out there and say, well, this guy can't stand with me, so I'm just going to make it exclusively a stand-up fight. He's going to mix it up, which there aren't too many guys who mix the martial arts as well as Demetrious Johnson does. He does it at that breakneck speed so that you think he's about to strike you, and next thing you know, he's taking you down. You think he's going to take you down, next thing you know, you're getting hit in the face. So I think because of the way he fights, with somewhat egolessly, I think he's going to do really well. The other part of it, the second part of it is he had his looking past an opponent moment in his last fight. You know, he fought against a guy who was essentially a UFC retread in Tim Elliott, a guy who only regained his entry into the UFC by winning the reality show and then got put right into a title fight. It was kind of a bogus title fight to book. But look what happened. In the beginning, Elliott had a Darce choke on him, and DJ patiently escaped it and then dominated the fight. So I don't think he's going to have that moment of overlooking this guy. I think he recognizes that this is a guy who can take him if he doesn't watch out.
One last thing on that is he has just a built-in chip on his shoulder, because it's not so much his complacency within his division. It's that I think he feels underappreciated in general. Like, so he's at this moment, and I don't feel like he's getting the hoopla that anybody else would. I think he just has this inherent thing, like, I want to be great because not many people see that I am. You know what I mean? Even still.
Let's end on this conversation with Anderson Silva, right? Goofball Anderson Silva. This guy's amazing, right? So there's this press conference. He faces off with no one because he was supposed to fight Kelvin Gastelum at UFC 212, and now he doesn't have one. And they're asking him, who are you going to fight? Who do you not want to fight? According to Malky Kawa, the manager of Yoel Romero, he turned that down. He's not interested in a fight with Vitor Belfort. He's not interested in a fight with Luke Rockhold. The one he wants, Nick Diaz rematch. Which leads me to wonder if he's been smoking weed with Nick Diaz to suggest such a thing to begin with. Chuck, we don't have a ton of time on this, but if you can give me some quick thoughts, what should the UFC do? Who should he fight? Someone offered me the idea of, how about Uriah Hall?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was supposed to be the next Anderson Silva at one point in life,
Right.
wasn't he? But anyway, this is Silva being the finicky Silva, right? Like, where he's trying to draw up the guy that he wants. You could understand why he wants to fight Nick Diaz. I mean, who doesn't want to fight Nick Diaz? It's a guy who hasn't been at his best in a long time, but still a big name. So I feel like that's going to be the thing. But obviously, you look at guys like, he just fought Derek Brunson, and it was controversial. His win was controversial. You have to go back a couple of years before then to find where he won. I know he beat Diaz at 183, but it was overturned. So, I mean, it's for him to say, well, I don't want to fight Luke Rockhold because he's coming off of a loss is just bogus. I mean, Luke Rockhold, to me, that's a fun fight. Like, you think about it, maybe it's too much for Anderson Silva at this point, where he's at, but to me, that's the kind of fight. Vitor Belfort would be great for me at this point, because Vitor Belfort's on his last legs. That's the kind of fight I want to see him do. Uriah Hall, I'd have no problem with that, you know what I mean? But Nick Diaz, I don't see it.
You're looking at this thing too logically. It's Nick Diaz. That's the fight.
Help us, Jeff.
Nick Diaz. Come on. Maybe I'm smoking the same stuff those guys, but come on.
You might lure Nick Diaz.
Nick Diaz is I don't really see Anderson as a guy who's rising back into the division. They're going to book him into fights that are fun and have some sort of appeal. The fact that if it was Nick calling him out, I would have a little bit more. I would doubt it more because Nick lost that fight. But the guy who won the fight wants a rematch.
Such a bizarre fight.
Also, do y'all follow?
Wasn't it awesome though when they did it the first time? Nick's lying on his back. I mean, come on.
Do y'all follow Nick Diaz on Instagram? Yeah. Oh my God! Even if he took the fight, it would probably take 3 or 4 years of a master cleanse to wash out all of the THC metabolites in that guy's system. I mean, he stays on the marijuana. I'm not mad at him, do what you got to do. All right, let's end on this note, if we can. There are a couple of interesting events this weekend. We talked about, if you're a hardcore fan, you can sort of flex your fight palette by saying, I like Demetrious Johnson, and right, there's usually an overlap there. Let's start this way and work towards me. Chuck, hit me with a deep cut. Most interesting fight this weekend to you. Now, of course, you can go co-main event, but I'm looking to see how good your fight palette is.
I mean, I've looked at the cards. It is a deep card. You got some nice fights on there, but
Some great ones.
I do like the Jacare fight.
Okay, fair enough.
The
No, it's a good
Jacare
one.
fight because I just think that Whitaker is a.
It's an under the radar fight to
It
an
is for
extent.
100%. Whitaker also coming into his own at just this moment, so I feel like it'd be a good fight.
That's the one I wanted to talk about. Can't you pick a different one?
Look at you two.
I mean, for me, it's that fight because of the fact that Jacare is at that crossroads, and so we don't know where his next move is going to be, and so he has that double. You know, he's been sort of he had thought he had a title fight, you know, in his sights. It seems like it's a lot farther along, but farther away from him. But so that's it. And then we're also talking about it as a Jacare fight, but Whitaker, man, that guy's been been hot. So you know, could be
Who's the kid debut?
Could be his moment.
So, okay, this is my deep cut. Number one on the UFC card, Tim Elliott versus Louis Smolka.
Yeah.
Now, Louis Smolka's in a tough position. He's dropped 2 in a row. This was a guy who had a nice win over Ben Nguyen and has not looked the same since. Had a rough cut against the Taz Mexican kid, the one with Jackson Wink, I forget his name now. Ray Borg.
Yep.
Right.
So he needs to rebound bad, and Tim Elliott is a super tough customer. That's a very tough fight for him. On the Bellator side, Eduardo Dantas taking on Leandro Higo. Let me tell you something about Higo. If you've never seen this kid, look out. He is a super top prospect. I'm shocked the UFC didn't even sign him, to be honest. And everyone's like, who's this guy getting an immediate title shot? Yo, that kid is. Because
Although no
he's
longer
really
for the
good.
title. He missed weight.
Oh, did he?
He did miss
What
weight.
an idiot. All right. God, these guys, I build them up and they're like, I ate cupcakes.
Oh no, but in that commission he has 7 more hours. So they got a towel.
Yeah, you know what? In New York,
The
they're
fight
just-
should be good, though.
Yeah, all he has to do is just like break dance on top of a
Just
towel.
no
And,
title in play.
oh, that's amazing.
Before we go, that
Yes.
towel thing, I got to return to the towel thing. What amazing work by Cormier.
I mean, you want to talk about veteran savvy.
I tried, I stepped on a scale and I put my hand against the wall and suddenly my weight was like 7 pounds low. How did he manage to get just 1.2 pounds? I mean, you have to have like the precise
finger to
touch
lift a pound.
to not, because what if he had weighed in at 202 or something? They would have said something was up. But he managed to get it right to 205. And that was like a work of art.
I bet he's a brilliant piano player, just ever so delicately touching those keys. All right, we are out. We are done. I believe we are back next week, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Right, and I think Ariel is back next week as well. So I will move down and we'll just kick Chuck out. That's what's going to happen. No, I'm teasing. I think we'll have the A-team back next week. Really appreciate you joining us. We do have Esther and Casey in Kansas City for UFC on Fox, so look for weigh-in coverage. That should be a gigantic S show. But we also have workouts and everything else, so stay tuned to MMA Fighting. Really appreciate you guys watching. For Ariel, who's not here, Chuck, Jeff, I am Luke. Until next time, hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.